Hey there, and welcome to Work Dope, a podcast on the messiness and the potential of humans at work. I'm Linda Stacy. I'm a corporate sellout who likes to think of herself as a corporate innovator, and I think that working in corporate America doesn't have to suck, even though it often does. By some stats, up to 80% of the workforce are unsatisfied at work. And on the flip side, the paradox here is that more and more we're expecting for work to define us, to create our identity, and help us find meaning and purpose in our lives. The pandemic and the great resignation, the great regret, quiet quitting, all of these themes have forced us to take a look at quality of life and what culture really means for people inside of organizations. I do, in fact, think that business and organizational life can be cool. I think that building things and solving real world problems, these are fundamental to the best part of the human experience. This is how we embrace potential. In this episode, I'm chatting with Nancy Roberts. Nancy is the Disc Wizard and owner of Insights, an organizational development company. Nancy is a certified behavioral analyst and utilizes assessments, coaching, and training to help clients get the right people on the bus and the right people in the right seats. She knows how to help organizations understand and unpack what's at the heart of human performance. That is motivation and behavior. Nancy has done this work for more than 20 years, and I think you'll feel this level of experience. It'll come through in this very textured and awesome conversation. It said Nancy is the Disc Wizard, and just reminding folks or letting you know in case you don't have previous experience with DISC, it's an assessment that measures in its broadest form, it's 4 aspects of personality. The D is for dominance, the I is for influence, the S is for steadiness, and the C is for conscientiousness. DISC is a tool for dialogue, not diagnosis. We talk about a lot of things. I'll just highlight a few here. We talk about what it means to be a command and control leader versus one who really drives commitment through communication. Was a really interesting part of the conversation, and Nancy has gone a couple of different ways on this and found that during the pandemic, command and control is sometimes necessary. Maybe it's not your entire leadership style, but maybe it needs to be there. We also talked about knowing when your belief system may be getting in the way of a productive conversation. I think everyone needs to have beliefs, right? But sometimes they're not helping a situation when you're having a conversation. So how do you navigate through this and lean towards neutral? We also talk about navigating for your own personal growth and success. Of course, these intro notes won't really reflect the level of awesomeness that I felt come through in this conversation. I really enjoyed Nancy, and I hope you do too. Nancy, I am thrilled to have you on Work Dope today. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm thrilled to have you today. So I've read your formal bio, so the audience is oriented that way, but I'm always curious to ask and know, how do you describe yourself when you're at a cocktail party? How do you describe what you do?
So I tend to tell people when asked what I do that I'm a behavioral analyst because I love to see people's reactions. So most people have like a moment of panic. Are you analyzing me right now? Is usually what they say. And then I let them know that I use that skill in context. So in helping organizations hire the right people, I analyze people before they're hired. I do my analysis then and make sure that they're a match for the culture and the job. And then people are usually a little less nervous after I explain that.
Awesome. So when you do that, I'm assuming you're interviewing people and maybe including a tool or some kind of assessment as well? What does that look like?
Yeah. Exactly. So I use an assessment. It's called Trimetrics HD, and DISC is one of the assessments within it. So it measures multiple different things about people, but most people are familiar with DISC, and that is one of the pieces in it. So yeah, I have them take the assessment online, and then I debrief my client on the results, and sometimes we'll end up interviewing the candidate if my client wants me to do that.
What are you looking for? Are there flags? I'm a little nervous about this conversation because human beings are human beings, and I like to be inclusive and open to the potential of human beings. But What are you looking for? What is the client looking for?
There are red flags. Like there are certain things I can see in this assessment that are going to have me give additional questions to my client of areas to dig into. So there's not really anything that's like just you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like,
Mhm.
oh, I saw that in the assessment, so we're not going to go any further. I think
Mhm.
people want to use assessments like that because they want a clear answer, yes or
Mhm.
no.
Mhm.
But to your point, humans are so much more complex than that.
Right.
So we really want to be careful when we use assessment tools. I
Right.
think that's why the guideline exists to, you can't use an assessment as more than a third of your hiring decision.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's a legal guideline. And so if those other 2/3, the interview process, their experience, their work history is all like great, all green and thumbs up, and then their assessment shows a few areas of concern, my desire is to dig into those areas. So
Mhm.
I will provide either my client additional interview questions to dig into those areas. I will do it myself by interviewing the candidate. And I use that as a focus for reference checks. So
Okay.
instead of just calling a reference and saying, hey, was this person a good person? Were they on time? Were they whatever? We will ask very specific questions
Okay.
for references. And the way we're able to do that is we have the candidate call the employer, or I'm sorry, the candidate have their reference call the employer.
Okay.
So my clients are not trying to hunt down these references,
Okay.
and then end up having that conversation where they're like, I'm sorry, I really can't share anything with you. The candidate has arranged the conversation to happen. And we
Mhm.
find that way people are much more willing to speak on the candidate's behalf. And they tend to be much more honest. I have a process that sort of warms them up,
Oh, interesting.
starts out with the more generic questions, like on a scale of 1 to 5, what would you
Mhm.
rate this person? But then gets into those very specific questions
Hmm.
that we're struggling to understand based on the assessment
Hmm.
results.
What percentage of your business is this type of work? Because as I understand it, you also do strategy, communications type of
Mhm.
work as well.
It's a great question. So prior to COVID, I would say probably less than 50% was hiring, and
Mhm.
maybe, well, it was probably 50-50. And then when COVID hit, the training side of my business sort of dried up, but companies were hiring. My clients went on hiring sprees. All these people were available. I work for a lot of essential companies, essential industries.
Mm.
And so, yeah, so they were scooping up people left and right. So it was kind of crazy to see this. I actually made more money in 2020 and 2021 that I had previously. And it was
Wow.
because of this hiring boom that happened with my clients. So now I would say it's probably still hasn't shaken down to 50-50 again. I'd say it's probably 60 to 70% still hiring.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very cool. And then in terms of your own personal history, like the inflection points or key things throughout the years that when you look back, it all kind of makes sense now, but maybe it didn't make sense while you were going through it. But I like to
Mm.
ask people about like their career journey, various inflection points that really have kind of driven them to the place they see themselves now.
So I think one of the pivotal moments, well, there were a couple, but one of the pivotal moments that led me to where I am is it was 1997, and I interviewed with this small consulting company. And I had previously worked for larger organizations, just like an administrative person or customer service person. And this company was looking at me as an office manager. And there were only 10 or 11 people in the company. And they couldn't pay what I wanted to make. And I almost turned down the job. But then the recruiter that was, matching us up said to me, I don't know what it is about this company, but I just feel like they're different. And you'd be a really good fit. And I'd hate to see you walk away just because of a number. So I interviewed 3 times with the company. They were the only company that ever talked to me about mission and values. That was like
Wow.
mind
In
blowing at the time,
1997. Yeah.
97,
Mhm.
97. Their mission in the world was to eliminate suffering in the workplace. And
Mhm.
because I had hated every job I'd ever had,
Wow.
that really resonated with me.
Mhm.
That was what they were all about. So I took the job, despite the pay cut. And for 5 years, it was a dream job. Best job I ever had. We were like a family. That's where I learned DISC. It's where I learned the tools that I use. They were all consultants and facilitators. So pretty quickly they saw my passion for their work, and I moved out of the office manager position, I think within a year, and pretty soon I was working with clients. So that was one pivotal moment, was taking that job. The other pivotal moment came in 2001 when, at the effects of September 11th, left that company in trouble and they had to let go of half their staff. I was one of them.
Mm.
And so I had this moment where it was like, well, what do I do? I've just learned this amazing work exists in the world. And I've done very little of it. It's not like I've been formally educated in it. There's nobody that's going to hire me to do this. That was my belief, because I'm so brand new at it. But this is my passion. Like, this is what I want to do. And so I took the bold, daring risk, at a very young age to start my own business. And I didn't know a lot. So I struggled financially for quite a few years because I didn't know how to sell. All I knew was that I liked the tools, know. So I basically had the certification, but it didn't mean anything. Nobody cares that you have a business card printed, and a website up if you can't figure out how to promote yourself and sell what you do. So it took me a few years to figure that out. But I would say those are the two most pivotal moments, was one, taking that job, and then two, losing that job. Quite frankly, it's what launched what I've been doing for the last 20 years.
20 years. Wow. Congratulations. That's really something. And when you are young and early, you benefit from not knowing some things, right? Like that, in some ways that can be knowledge. And also, I guess risk is just totally different. It can be quite different when you're younger.
For me, that's very true. I have watched myself become less risk averse as I've gotten older, and I'm even aware of it. And I'm like, why does this scare you? You were 20 years old jumping off of, bungee jumping, you know? So I do think not everybody, I think often people become, a little bit more nervous about those big risks as we get older. Whether that's life experience or just less time to recover if we really mess it up. I don't know.
Right. You know that you have the capacity to build. It's just, you have the time and the energy. If you really did have to start from scratch or something, I mean,
that's true.
That can be a scary thought for some. Wow. So I want to shift a little bit, talking about communication in general. And in that previous conversation we had a couple of years ago, this spoke to me, the language that you used around command and control being something that's behind us. It's not completely, but what we're coming from, a command and control type of leadership, maybe. And then how communication can shift from that towards something better. Anything that you would say broadly about that, or I can ask a very specific question if you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've written multiple articles and newsletters in my business about this command and control, because I work with quite a few what I call non-glamorous industries. So, construction, manufacturing, production facilities, and they're filled still with command and control leaders. I wish I could say not so much, but I also don't want to make it sound like command and control is something we should never use, because there are opportunities for command and control leadership. I will tell you that our military still runs on command and control leadership. And if we go to war,
that's what you want.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Right. That's what you want. It's what you need. You don't have time, on a battlefield to discuss and get consensus and commitment from the people that are out there. You have literally got to direct, and they have to follow, right? Or people die. So when COVID hit, and here I am writing all about command and control is passe, command and control needs to go the way of the dinosaur, and then COVID hit. And then I realized we still do need command and control leadership at times. There are times when directives just need to come. And when you pivot an organization, you better have some command and control going on. Again, you don't have time in the heat of the battle for consensus building. But percentage-wise, if command and control is more than, I would say, 10% of your leadership style at any given time, except those times of battle, it's probably weighted too heavily. I would prefer a more consensus building type of leadership, commitment type building, because I think in our previous conversation, I think I probably said command and control brings you compliance,
Right.
and other more, sophisticated, developed
Mhm.
types of leadership bring you commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And compliance is usually short term, in the moment, in response to the authority of the command and control. It's sort of like when you're driving down the highway at night and you see the cop and you
Right.
immediately slow down to the
Right.
speed limit.
Right.
Whereas the second they're out of view, you
Right.
take off again, right?
Mhm.
That's exactly how command and control leadership works. When that presence is there, you've got the compliance. I'll do it. Yes, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. But it can lead to outright sabotage when that authority is gone, because people have no commitment to the goal, no commitment to the leader. So for the majority of cases and the majority of time, there is a different leadership needed. Commitment looks like, even when people don't agree with you, they're committed to the cause, or they're committed to the decision, committed to the goal. I worked for a leader like that. He was dominant. He was headstrong. He was forceful. He was just, I think in the past, he probably was a command and control leader. I could kind of sense that, but he had grown and he had developed, and he had learned the value of having a team that was committed. And so even when he would make a decision that I was 100% not on board with, I worked hard to make his decisions successful. And the main reason I did that is because he listened to my concerns. That was it. He couldn't always respond to them. He couldn't always give me the answer I wanted, but he listened. He made me feel validated and valued. So when he made the decision to go the other direction that I wanted, I trusted that he had at least considered my point of view.
Yeah, it's been my experience that some individual contributors might not recognize that they are being considered, like that the only way that they understand that they are being considered is maybe if they get the way they want. It might be oversimplifying it. Of course, I'm completely projecting here. There are stages, and I think as we go through our career, things might shift as far as all of this goes. I think I've asked other guests this before. How do you know when you're really being listened to? Like, what are the cues to be picking up on? Because it's not that you get what you want. That's not how you know you've been listened to. It's something different. Is there a way to explain that with words?
It's an excellent question, because I'm not sure I've made that distinction before. I am thinking of a model right now. It's an oldie but a goodie. I'm thinking of the 5 dysfunctions of a team model. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but the 5 dysfunctions. So the model, going up the model, the baseline is lack of trust.
Yes.
When there's a lack of trust and people aren't speaking up, sharing vulnerabilities, kind of talking about things that, aren't always pleasant to talk about, there's the inability for conflict. Like, if people aren't speaking up, you're not going to get good, productive, healthy conflict on a team. And you need that. You need to know the different perspectives. You need to know the people that are nodding their head aren't just saying, yeah, I hear you, but they're actually in agreement. If people won't conflict, you can't get commitment. So there has to be something in that earlier stage of vulnerability, I think, that you feel safe with the person.
Right.
You feel safe to express a dissenting opinion with the person.
Yeah.
And that's what enables you to commit to something.
Yeah.
It's that ability to speak up, be heard. I'm trying to think if there's specific things he would do. I don't remember him ever necessarily feeding back or parroting back what I've said.
Interesting.
I think he was present. He was very present when he listened to you. I mean, you knew you were being listened to.
Okay.
He would take notes. I remember him writing things down.
That's nice.
I also remember that when a decision was made, he also fed back to the group what he had heard.
Yes.
So, I know that some of you aren't exactly 100% enthused about this direction.
Yeah.
Here's why I've made the decision to go in that direction anyways. Yeah. And at some point we will have to look at this and readjust. I might be wrong. So yeah, I think it was humility on his part. He was present, and you got it fed back to you that he had listened.
Right.
Usually in the group setting.
Yeah. Safety and trust are huge topics, and they've come up thematically a lot with these conversations. And I'm probably going to be dedicating entire episodes to themes around that, because so much is happening between the human beings. And also, something you said earlier was bringing me back to the fact that everything that gets discussed as it relates to like organizational fill in the blank seems to be on a spectrum, because even your suggestion that command and control is part of the full breadth, for whatever percentage it makes sense. That's really refreshing to hear. And I agree with it, makes sense. We don't have to turn our backs completely on certain things, but moving towards commitment personally feels much better to me. The safety and trust. I had some really weird things happen early in my career, same timeline as you, in terms of it was before 9/11. I had a boss say something really outrageous to me. And you had said early in this conversation that every job you had prior to that job in 98, you hated. Are there things that you could think of that just from that experience that you knew you weren't safe, or things that would happen? Describe some of that, if you will. And I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure. I can give you a list. I had one job, I had no training. I was literally thrown in to deal with customers with zero training. So I felt completely inept. That was one of those things where I made the decision in the first week to leave, even though it took me 3 months to do so. So there's the case for onboarding. I had a job where I worked for a very large pharmaceutical company, and they just made very inefficient decisions. And I literally would make proposals to management about how to do something more efficient, whether it was me splitting my time with this other department across the hall because my department couldn't keep me busy enough. All these different things just fell on deaf ears. And I actually got in trouble, by the way, for going one level above my manager to her manager. I got in trouble. It was mind boggling for me. Another one, I had a manager say something very harsh to me. I was joking and in a playful mood. Now, as a behavioral analyst, I recognize you don't play with the high dominant personality when they're in intense solution result mode. But at that age, I didn't really know. And I said something playful back, and I got my head bit off.
Wow.
And that right then made my decision that I was going to exit. They say people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. And that's true in about 75% of the time. I think people do leave because of the direct relationship with their manager. There was a job where I was managing up. My manager seemed, now I don't want to say it because I have more perspective, but I think he seemed inadequate. And I had so many ideas and so many things I wanted to do. I was constantly managing up. And I felt really inhibited in that job.
Yeah. You say you have more perspective now. Is the wording that you just put on that the wording from your perspective, or what you would have said back then?
Oh, I would have said a lot different back then.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, inadequate, or what was the word I used? Was it inadequate?
Yeah, I think you said inadequate. And that you had a lot of ideas and you were managing up and exhausted by it.
Yeah. I probably would have used a lot different. I'm sure back then I used a lot different words, a lot less kind. Inadequate is kind, because I really, looking back, he didn't stay there very long. I don't think he was qualified to deal with the type of people he had to deal with in that role. And I actually stayed in touch with him after I left the job. Over the years, we were in the same hometown, so we kept in contact. He's a nice man. He's such a nice man. But in that context, it was challenging. I'm sure it was challenging for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen, and I know that this was me too. Early in the career, you have all these ideas and they're fantastic. And you might notice something that seems inadequate or antiquated or whatever those things are. And you just want to go in and make change if you're an eager individual contributor, and finesse might not be there. I think these are some of the things that are not part of an onboarding process for a very young work staff, that you are going to have fantastic things that you want to bring forward, but the finesse and the soft skills to make that more effective and building perspective over time. My sister shares a very similar story. She laughs at herself. She says, Linda, if I only knew the way she was reacting to this new bad boss that she had and how she was trying to handle it. She's like, I no idea what she was doing in that experience. Something else that had come up is around how you can have a more neutral conversation in order to yield better results with a team? You already described one particular leader who has grown, moved into something new. And how does one begin to build awareness around how they might be letting their beliefs fuel a conversation in a way that is not productive?
I have a simple answer, and then I can go into a little bit more of an explanation. I think the best way to know if your belief system is coloring any situation is if you're emotional. If your emotions are triggered, I'm going to go on the limb. I try not to say always or never, but I'm going to say most often there is a belief system that is getting triggered when you get emotional. To enter a conversation neutrally is very difficult because it means you have to suspend your belief about what's happening, that person, yourself, the situation. So one of the things I do with teams in either emotional intelligence training or what we call crucial conversations training or difficult conversations training is help people get to a neutral place, help them suspend their story that they happen to be spinning in that moment enough so that they can come back to more neutral facts. Facts are more objective, right? Facts have less of an emotional charge. I was with a team yesterday doing training. We were having food brought in, coffee brought into the training room. And so one of the servers, when she left the room, the door slammed. I think it just slipped and it slammed. It was a heavy door. So when I was talking about that, stories and our triggers and things like that, I said, when that door slammed, I said, what did you think? Everything was there were 10 people in the room, from she was mad, she was in a rush, she slipped, the door just closed. It was just amazing. It was like you could have 10 different perspectives based on this one thing that happened. And so I said, if you grew up in a home with an angry person and there was a lot of door slamming, you could have had a physical reaction to that because that signifies danger to you. So based on how we see it, our vantage point, our past experiences, we're going to spin a story, and then that story is going to color the interaction. If you can get a control of your story and be like, okay, well, I get that that's just my story. The only thing that happened is a door closed loudly. Then you can come to the conversation much more neutral and much more willing to hear the other person's perspective. And give them the benefit of the doubt that you maybe don't see everything and that they've got some information to share. So I think how your belief system is, working, it's that emotion. Something should or shouldn't be a certain way.
Right. And at the same time, we are biological beings. And so we couldn't completely suppress our emotions. It's part of it's our limbic system, right? I talk about this in another episode about how our brain is developed. You can be in these conversations and having the moments. I imagine that the advice is to breathe, right? Like that, because even if you try to come into the conversation neutral, there's going to be points where an emotion can flare during that conversation, and breathing. And also the idea here is to stay committed to, or to be working towards commitment towards whatever the organizational goal is, right? And keeping the focus there.
So I worked with this gentleman, high dominant, command and control leader for sure. While working with him and his team gave him the feedback that his anger is very difficult for them, that they avoid him when he's angry. So at first it was falling on deaf ears. He wasn't getting it. He's like, I'm not angry, I'm passionate.
I love it.
And then I finally said to him, listen to what your team is saying. You have invested thousands of dollars and many hours to have me here. Do not miss this lesson. So at the end of the exercise that we were in, everyone had to make a commitment, how they were going to work on the thing that has come to light that they need to work on. And he said, I'm going to go to anger management therapy. And you could have heard a pin drop.
Wow.
The fact that he got it and was willing to make a commitment like that was amazing. So I went to see him after 4 sessions of anger management therapy and asked him how it was going. And he said, Well, I'm learning some things, I'm the breathing, the count to 10, the whatever. He goes, but I still don't understand why I'm so angry.
Oh.
So I went through the process with him by taking a most recent instance where a man in his shop, his machine manufacturing shop, infuriated the CEO, or as that's how he put it. And I walked him through that specific example and got him to see his story that he told about that employee that made him so angry. And he said, Nancy, I just learned in this 10-minute conversation with you more than I've learned in 4 sessions of anger management. He said, I've been wanting to know why I'm so angry. And that hasn't come up. It's like, it's apparently not therapy,
Right.
And what he learned was from his childhood, weakness was unacceptable.
Right.
He was literally physically beaten for his father for signs of weakness. So when he would interpret weakness in another, they made a mistake, they were wrong, they wouldn't answer a question, they shut down, it would infuriate him. It would trigger that weakness, projection of his, and he would just lose it. We got there in 10 minutes. And now at least he has the awareness. Does that mean he's not going to get angry and not? No, but in those moments, if he can go, whoa, this is my reaction to weakness because of what I went through. Okay. So it's like, if we tell people to count to 100 or tell people to take a break or go sit in your corner, we got to give them the tools of what to think about when they're doing that. Because if they go in that corner and all they do is keep spinning their story, it's just going to make them angrier. It's not going to calm them down. So they have to have the awareness of, what am I telling myself in this moment that is making me so blank, making me so sad, making me so embarrassed, making me so scared. What am I telling myself?
There's just so much here. And we attach meaning to so much, and many things don't even deserve that amount of energy. It could be the door closing, nothing, it slipped. There's no additional meaning. It was a little distracting. It scared me first, whatever it is. This can really have people spiral downwards if they're not aware that it's even happening. I think I know that for myself personally in my own career, that there were times when I knew I was getting a flood. That's all I knew. I just knew that what is happening right now, or I would take a moment, like what just happened? Like what was said? And then over the years, been able to understand more about what is the story that I'm telling myself. Is it true? Is this linked to something that is real? And if there is a potential something going on, I could ask for clarity around it from that other person. And that is a good and brave and courageous thing to do, to kind of say, this is the story I was telling myself in this moment. Can you help me get clear? This is how I've heard Brene Brown say it, but I've heard it from a lot of other people over the years too. I don't think she invented that, but I'm glad that she's been a loud voice about it, because it's given people some tools. What a great example. And we all have something. We might not be reacting with flames around what we perceive as weakness, but there are, I know that I have them, and man, anyway. Okay.
One of my favorite mantras to teach my clients, well, teach everyone if they'll let me, is if it triggers me, it's about me. If it triggers me, it's about me. And I practice this mantra probably every day myself. When I feel that emotion, because like you said, we're emotional creatures, right? Our brain is meant to perceive threat, right? That's how we survive.
Absolutely. Right.
So, it doesn't matter whether it's somebody who looks upset or a saber-toothed tiger, my body's going to react the same. But we also have our conscious mind and our prefrontal cortex. And so we can ask the question, like, what is triggering me? And if it triggers me, it's about me. So why am I reacting to this when this person next to me having no reaction whatsoever? Right. So if we can kind of take responsibility for our triggers and for what's happening here, we will put a lot less blame over there.
Absolutely. And just have a better experience of life overall, less blame, less complaint.
It's what I call emotional freedom.
Yeah.
If you want emotional freedom, figure out your stories and change your stories.
Yeah. And here too, I think there's a spectrum. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Have you been
Mhm.
exposed to that work? So that is the
Yep.
extreme of being able to maintain your own reaction state in
Yes.
within the Holocaust, on being at a concentration camp. And so I
Yes.
love that as the best possible example of what a human's capable of. However, as we described earlier, there are going to be job environments where it will make sense for you to leave anyway, even while you're maintaining the best and taking full responsibility. Have you had much experience? I don't know if this comes up in your work, coaching people out of a position?
I have a quote from Viktor Frankl
Oh, awesome.
on a document that I used in my training.
Oh, that's
yesterday.
fantastic.
Yeah. So here's what he says, because
Yep.
it's so applicable to what we're saying. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom.
Absolutely.
Viktor Frankl.
Fantastic quote.
Love that space. We just have to be willing and able to give ourselves that space.
Right. And it's a challenge when work environments are hectic. I mean, literally just chaotic. So I was asking if you have been in a position where you've coached someone through or out of a job, or, into something better, I would hope, where something's maybe just not going well. Yeah. Describe that.
Yeah. The first one that came to mind was a COO of an organization who came to me and said he was ready for what was next. Basically, he worked for a command and control CEO, and he did a great job dealing with a lot of the heat that came down, but he was ready and he wanted to go own his own business. Mm. I coached him around what I thought where the gaps were between a COO and a CEO position in order for him to move on. And he did. He wanted to move back to the West Coast of the country, back to where he was originally from. And he ended up doing that.
That's fantastic.
So that was the first one that came to mind. I've coached a lot of people based on those assessment tools that I use. Often what will happen is they'll come to me and they're not happy. And then I look at the assessment. I go, well, of course you're not happy. You're in a job that wants something completely different than what you bring to the table. And then based on that, we'll figure out the right next move for them. The other thing I do is I help companies determine if the person they're going to promote into a supervisory or a management position even wants to be there. Because what happens so much is, because we've all been told that's the path to success, climb that corporate ladder, take that management position. People who have no interest in managing others accept those positions. Yeah. And then what they find is, instead of being the expert and being the best at whatever they were doing, they are now the worst supervisor at the people who are supposed to be doing it. Well, there's indicators in those assessments. So I had a client, she called me and she said, hey, I've got this really great solo contributor. She's amazing. People love her. Thinking of moving her into a supervisory position. I said, before you do that, let's get an assessment on her. So she assessed her, and I looked at this one particular part of it, which is called values and motivators. And it's what the person's passionate about and what they're driven to do. So you want to make sure that aligns with the rewards of a job. So I looked at it, and she had this motivator called individualistic. When it's high, it's the drive for power and control over your destiny and possibly the destiny of others. It's very autonomous. It's competitive. It's, I want to run my own show. I want to be in control of my own domain. So very often department leaders, managers, business owners, salespeople, they all seem to have this high individualistic, because then it's, this is my show. I get to control all this. She had a low individualistic. I said, this woman does not want to be in charge of others. And if you ask her, she'll say yes, because she thinks that's the next logical step. And because her passive behavioral, so she had a passive disc style, is just supportive, and it's going to do what you, the owner of the company, wants her to do. So she'll be a reluctant leader, and may not even do well. And now you're missing out on all her amazing capabilities because you did the natural progression and put her in a supervisory position. So the owner said, well, I don't want to lose her. What is she passionate about? I said, she's passionate about these two things called theoretical and aesthetic. When they combine, you get a very creative, almost creative genius person who loves to solve problems and is really good at seeing all angles of something. I said she likely wants more time off and more education. That's the drive of the aesthetic work-life balance and the theoretical knowledge. So when she went in there, she said the woman loves her job, loves what she's doing, but lo and behold, would like more time off to pursue education.
Wow.
Right? To pursue things that would end up benefiting the company. She also had her jump on a team that was going to be integrating some sort of new technology or whatever. And she was over the moon about it. So yeah, so she preserved, this amazing employee, didn't lose her, but was able to give her things that were rewarding to her, rather than throwing her into a supervisory position that she probably would have not enjoyed.
And are you seeing that these different type of opportunities are lending themselves also to increases in pay and the other things that come along with or go along with moving up and managing people?
That is something companies need to get better at.
Yeah.
Because companies traditionally look at it as supervisor and managers get paid more.
Right.
So I work with my clients to try and carve out these new positions. Like, what would this look like for growth for this person if they're not leading others? And then how can that compensation be adjusted? So that is something I think we need to work a little better at.
Yeah. It's a tough space. Huh. I wanted to ask, I know that DISC is something that is quite involved, and probably when you speak about it, if you speak about it on stage, even giving 45 minutes to the topic probably isn't enough. But do you have a brief statement that you tell people in terms of what it's based in, the methodology, just something nutshellish?
I actually think you can learn DISC really quickly. I think that's one of the reasons it's so popular, is it's just 4 factors. The D stands for dominance, and it measures how you handle problems and challenges. So if you're really high on the D scale, like from 0 to 100, if you're up there at 100, you're probably that, assertive, aggressive, command and control leader, because you are all about dealing with the problem and challenge. The I stands for influence, and it deals with how you deal with people and persuade them to your point of view. And the higher the influence on that scale, the more charismatic you tend to be. You use your charm and your personality and your sense of humor to persuade people. On the steadiness scale, the S, that measures how you pace yourself and respond to change. And the higher the S, the more slow paced you tend to be and the more resistant to change. Like, I really want some predictability and some security here. And then the C stands for compliance. And that measures how you deal with rules and procedures. So the higher the compliant, the more you tend to be cautious and careful and compliant to those rules and procedures that exist.
Do you find that there are similarities or themes in certain professions? Like if people choose a certain profession, they're likely to fall in these ranges or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. When we benchmark positions, which means analyze the job and have the job tell us what it needs, there's definitely strong correlations. Like, for example, outside sales typically will require some dominance and influence. Dominance is results oriented and influence is people oriented. You put those two together, you get a really persuasive style. Like, I'm going to get my results, but through my relationships with people. If I was to take, I'm going to call it a stereotypical IT job or, computer job, that's going to require some more S and C, some more steadiness and compliance. I need you to be able to sit at your computer and focus for long periods of time and get things done accurately and cautiously. Like, we need engineering. We need this to be perfect. Right. We can't have a blueprint for a bridge that has not been checked over by a high compliant. So yeah, you absolutely can see the different functions of business displayed all around that DISC model.
I have now 2 other questions. So say you have accounts, there's an accounting department for every company, right? Even if it's one person. So if there are characteristics in common, I don't know if characteristic is the right word to use. I mean, do you end up having problems because maybe you need someone who's willing to take the leadership role, but they don't have enough of that in their profile or something? Like where you have a team of people with fairly common characteristics, but you need some variance there in order to have who's going to lead the team.
Yeah. So let's say you had a whole group of SCs in an engineering department and you need someone to step up to take leadership. What you would look for is someone with the motivator of individualistic. So then you look over to the motivators graph. So DISC doesn't tell you if someone can or can't do the job.
Okay.
It's how they're going to do the job.
Got
right?
it. Okay.
And yes, if they're in a role that requires different behavior, the cool thing about DISC is it's adaptable, right? We've got our natural behavior, but we can also adapt it. With the motivators, like what I value and what I'm passionate about, those aren't adaptable. At least for the time being, they are what they are. And I really need to get them fulfilled to be happy. So I would look at that group of people and say, well, who has a higher individualistic? So now they want to lead, and you're probably already going to see them trying to lead because they can't help themselves. And now let me get them some training and some coaching to develop the skills of leadership. That's the bang for your buck.
Right.
They've got the natural desire to do it, right? They've got the SC behaviors. So there are some things they're going to have to adapt. They're going to have to get out of their shell a little bit. They're going to have to learn how to have difficult conversations with people, which they're not going to love, but we can give them skills to do that. We can get them training to do that.
Okay. That was my next question, was how can we fill the gaps? Is that reasonable?
I can give you an example for myself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm a high I. I'm 100% high I. High I's are known to be talkers, so I'm definitely in the right profession. But they're also known to not be very good listeners. I've been coaching people for 20 years, and I can tell you the first few years, I was just telling people what to do in my very charming, persuasive way. But I assumed I had the answers. I assumed I knew what they needed to do. So here I am telling. Well, you know what that creates in people. It just creates resistance. Nobody wants to be told what to do. So I had to, get the awareness that I am not a natural listener. And I got that through feedback, which was really well needed, but not at the time very well liked or received.
Right.
But I got the awareness, and then I realized the impact that was having. It's just, I was telling people what to do and they just weren't doing it. And then I developed the skill of listening because it is a skill set. And while it's not my natural tendency, and there are times I'm literally sitting on my hands, rocking back and forth because I want to tell them what to do. I know if I listen, it's going to go much better and I'm going to get more insight that I need to ultimately help them. But so it was a skill I had to learn. It was not a natural behavior.
Interesting. So one of the things that I like to think about and write about, talk about, is our concepts of self-leadership, and that anyone in an organization can and should, exactly what we've been talking about this entire time, take responsibility and really lead themselves first. So do you have any recommendations for an individual contributor who maybe doesn't have the best boss? The boss might not be, they're not nefarious or a bad person or anything. They just aren't very good. Are there things that an individual contributor can do to have a better conversation?
Yeah. So that's a challenging place to be. I would encourage the person to look at it as an opportunity for growth. This is my belief. When someone comes to me in a relationship and tells me how horrible and terrible the person is they're partnered with, I stop them and suggest my belief, which is water seeks its own level. And we as humans are 98% water. So there is a reason you are partnered with this person. Now, I guess it's possible you got married 10 years ago and you grew exponentially and they did not. And now it's like this. More often than not, that person is almost at your level and they are triggering you. And that is going to teach you something.
Yeah.
So learn what you need to learn there. And maybe it is that you have to exit because you did grow. That is possible what has happened. But more often than not, you've got two people that are stuck and they've just turned on each other. So if an employee came to me and said, I'm this and I'm that, and my boss isn't, I would encourage that employee to look at it like an opportunity for growth. There's a reason you ended up here.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. And I never know it. Years ago, I used to always assume I knew what their lesson was and then tell them accordingly what to do about it. Now I'm like, I don't know what your lesson is. It could be that your lesson is to draw boundaries faster in your life, to make faster decisions. Maybe you are meant to get in this job and go, this is not for me, and I'm moving on, because every other job you've stayed in too long. Maybe every other job you've abandoned immediately. So your lesson is to sit with this and go, what can I learn here? What am I supposed to learn from this situation? So I would really have the person dig in and try and figure out, why did I bring this into my life? What am I supposed to learn here? How can I use this to my advantage?
Yeah.
I feel like when we're dealt a difficult person to deal with, if we cannot take it so personally, we have so much to learn. So much to learn. I like now, because of course I, do this work every day. I like to see challenging people as an opportunity for me to test my skills. Can I figure out a way to communicate with this person in a way that will get me what I want, help us solve a problem, reach a goal? Almost every leadership team I work with, I'll tell you my personal one, it's just my favorite now. Every leadership team I work on typically has a contrarian personality. And those used to be the most difficult people for me to work with. They don't want me there. They don't want to sit in a room singing kumbaya, as they call it. They don't want to open up. They don't need therapy. It's just like, why? This is literally what they say. I thought we were here to work. I thought we were here to work. Why aren't we working? Why aren't we working? And then usually the leader who has me there is like, but this will help us work better together, So my goal now with that contrarian is, I am going to win them over. I am going to break them down and get them to love me, to see the value of this work, and to open up and at least become less of a barrier to the team developing. Do you know what I mean? And I have great success with that type of person.
Wow.
Because I don't take it personally anymore.
Yeah.
Like, years ago I used to think, oh my God, they don't like me. They don't see my value. It's so not about me.
Right.
That person who looks like they don't care tends to care more than anybody else on that team. It's just, they've been hurt so many times. They've given up. So now it's just easier to avoid all this touchy-feely, leadership development or whatever we call it. And I have great success getting that person to, like I said, open up.
That's fantastic.
But I had to control my story. I had to control my trigger, my belief that they didn't like me. I had to set my stuff aside and be more neutral.
Yeah, it must change quite a bit after impact of those engagements as well. I found it's transformed for me over the last 15, 20 years, how much more exhausted I was from any type of training. And a lot of it had to do with this kind of thing, me interpreting various experiences of the people in the room. And instead, if I'm really focused on the content and the levels of engaging, that it's just much better for us all. And I'm, as the facilitator, much less exhausted from it all. So one question I like to ask every guest as a final question is the question of value. And this has come up a little bit already because it's basically built into the disc, right? In terms of like what an individual values, it's tied to beliefs and kind of the same thing. But for you personally, how do you know that you're valued in your work? What are like the best, most clear indicators? What does that look like for you now? I also like to ask people to reflect maybe how that's changed over the years to the extent you want to share.
I like that second part because I had a 2-part answer. And I think the 2-part answer is how it used to be and how it is now. So I do believe I get valued or feel valued from my disc style, which is my high I. So high I's want to be popular and they want to be well liked. So years ago, for me, if I got a round of applause at the end of a training or a standing ovation at the end of a speaking engagement or someone saying, wow, you're amazing, I love you, that was enough. I felt valued. But over time, I feel like my number one motivator is called utilitarian. And utilitarian is the drive for return on investment. So that means everything I put my time and energy into, I want to see a greater return. And it's usually the number one driver of most entrepreneurs and business owners. So I think for now, that's what dominates for me as to whether I feel valued is, have I provided value? So utilitarian people want a win-win. So if a client just paid me a lot of money to train their team, I want to see that get translated, that value get translated in their results.
Mm-hmm.
So I am much less concerned about whether the team likes me now versus whether they got the value they were looking for and whether it's going to make a difference for them ongoingly. So I think that's how I feel value, is if my client actually got value.
That's great. That's great. And again, the change, it changes for everyone. I like to ask that question because many people are frustrated by their work environment. We see it in the press, we see it in HBR, we see it all these places, and I think there's always this resounding, I don't feel valued. And I want people to get clear on what it means for them, whatever it is, to know what it means for them personally to be valued, and then actually look for the indicators or lack thereof in their work environment and create it, seek it out, whatever that happens to be. So thanks for sharing that. And thanks for all of this, but a very rich conversation. I love learning more about DISC from your perspective. And yeah, thank you so much, Nancy.
Absolutely. Well, I can send you a link where you could take one of the assessments I have. It's a complimentary version.
Yep.
So you'll see the motivators as well that we've talked a little bit about. So you won't have to guess what yours is. Yeah.
I can include that in the description of this episode when it goes up. And then just if you could share right now, either a website, a URL, or what's the best place for people to learn more about you and your work?
Sure. My DISC Wizard website is DISC Wizard, and it's DISC wizardonline.com.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Nancy. Have a great rest of your week.
Linda.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
There you have it. Episode 18 is in the books. I wanted to repeat a couple of key ideas and bring some additional thoughts from this episode. I wanted to mention, of course, at first, Man's Search for Meaning. I think this book has come up in other conversations. It is by Viktor Frankl, who was a victim of the Holocaust. And the overall theme, it's actually been many years since I've read the book, is that you can maintain your sense of self and value and who you are, even in the worst of environments and circumstances. Not that we wish this on anyone, but his reflections, having been there and making it out, are just so key in terms of what the human spirit is able to do and overcome. It really is quite remarkable. And the quote that Nancy spoke, I have used in talks that I've done too, and I want to repeat it here again. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. I just think that is huge. That is acknowledging that we have the ability to take a pause and understand why and what we're reacting to. And reactions are necessary, an important part of life. It's like I have to remind myself that, our reactions, I have to not judge my own reactions. I have to not judge other people's reactions. But I do think that just taking more ownership in the way that we're responding to anything around us is absolutely the path to growth and freedom. The limbic system came up in this conversation. I talk about the limbic system and our emotional response in episode number 2, if you want to go back to that. The idea here, again, is that your very strong reactions, especially, are likely linked to something that happened to you way before the moment that is happening right now. And that you do have a chance and a choice to react differently. But awareness is the first step, right? It doesn't just happen overnight. Nancy also brought up the idea that you have to feel safe in order to express a dissenting opinion, and also that this dissenting opinion and having these kinds of conversations that are more challenging are really part of what enables you to have the ability to commit to something, which is what she was talking about as a more ideal way to really lead and have team working on something, is to have folks that are committed to something, even if they're not 100% in agreement with what came through. Were they at least heard and understood through the conversation and getting there? It also occurs to me that the more and more that I delve into these topics and talk to people, the less black and white anything is. Everything that we discuss as it relates to organizational fill in the blank seems to be on a spectrum. Even the fact here that command and control does have its place. And I agree with this. I've had conversations with my husband about the fact that if you're in the military and you are at war, you need people to do what they're being told to do. There isn't the opportunity, the chance, that the option. It's not appropriate for there to be a discussion in those moments. And again, nothing black and white, everything on a spectrum. I really related to Nancy's comment about feeling inept in her job early on, or one of her jobs earlier in her career when she had no training. This is absolutely something that I experienced. Some jobs are more complicated than others in terms of training, and even with some amount of training, a lot of jobs I think follow more of an apprenticeship model, or that you're going to learn so much as you get more and more into the work that could never fully be done in a training simulation. It's just a challenging place to be. This too is a spectrum. I do think that there needs to be really well-designed onboarding. That is part of the work that I do in the real world, is design training. And I know that there are parts of this that I do that need work, and that we have all of these expectations of training being able to solve for so many problems. And training isn't always the answer, but geez, there needs to be some idea of what you want a person to be able to do once you set them on their own. I also love this conversation we had around the best way to know if your belief system is coloring any situation is if you're getting emotional, if you're being triggered in a moment. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with having emotions. We wouldn't be human if we didn't have emotions. But there is something in that. When you are reacting, your belief system may be being challenged, there could be a difference in values or something in there. If you feel this happening to yourself, it's absolutely a great time to just start asking questions in the most neutral way that you possibly could. Just really small questions so you can get clear on things, so that you're not filling in the blanks with things that aren't really there. I think that's what happens a lot. We begin to go into protection mode, and when we do that, we protect ourselves for worst case scenario types of situations. If you can begin to relax, you realize you're getting defensive, you realize you're getting emotional, you can relax and ask a couple of simple questions, and attempting to do that without accusation in the way that you're asking them, or whatever other tones tend to come in when we're feeling defensive. I know that I have a defensive tone for sure, but the more that we can go into it with wonder and discovery, and where that you're probably not meeting that other person in the conversation, there's so often just a disconnect, and then people are getting out of control on things that aren't even there. I also loved this truth, the less blame that you have, the less complaint, the less you're pointing fingers in your life, the more emotional freedom you're going to have. If you want emotional freedom, stop complaining. I mean, that's a big one. I had to go to an event a few weeks ago that I wasn't really thrilled to go to, but I understood why I was being asked to be there, and I decided it was on my calendar that I wasn't going to complain about it. I just decided that I wasn't going to complain about it. And you know what? There was freedom in that. I think that this is a good test. It would be interesting for anyone to go for 24 hours or 48 hours and do a complaint check. Try to eliminate it for those days, or just not mark yourself in a negative way, but just take note anytime you realize you're getting into a complaining mode. And just maybe do a little audit, not even judging yourself one way or the other. Just kind of check it out. See if you can eliminate it. See if you can just stop when you're in the middle of it. Or if there's an action you could take to maybe get past it or through it. I do think that complaint often holds the roots to something with a lot of potential if we're willing to look at the other side of it. That's something else I talked about in one of those very early episodes, probably episode number 2 as well. I also thought this idea around carving out new positions, especially for individual contributors that are highly valued and valuable. What does growth look like for someone if they're not going to be leading others? That organizations need to be better at figuring that out. That has been such a part of my entire career. And maybe I could get someone on the show to talk more about what this looks like, because it seems incongruent. It feels like with a lot of the people that I've spoken to, that growth and leadership, it's all about moving up the corporate ladder or something like this, in a very kind of the path to executive. And I think there are other ways to grow and develop careers that should and could come with all the other benefits of moving up the corporate ladder. Maybe not the same financial profile, but definitely similar. It's an interesting space to explore. All of those things and much more for further conversation. I'm sure that these topics will come up again and again and again. I hope that you are doing well in your work and in your life, and that you are seeking to up-level the experience for yourself and for other humans in your environment. Shore yourself up, live your values with an integrity, even when things feel like a little bit of a shit show. As always, please leave some comments, messages. I'd love to read or hear them. You could even record a message for me on maybe an app on your phone and then send it to me as an attachment in email to linda@workdopepod.com. That's Linda at WORKDOPEPOD.com. Until next time, this is Linda Stacy signing off for Work Dope. Bye-bye.